Hi, my name is Terry Burns, and I'm here at the Grey Highlands Public Library in Flesherton, Ontario. And I'm going to be talking to the poet Brian Henderson on the occasion of the publication of his 12th book of poetry, Unidentified Poetic Object. Before I do that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Brian. He has been a Governor General's Award finalist for the poetry book Nerve Language, published by Peddler Press in 2007, and a finalist for the Canadian Authors Association Chalmers Award for Poetry for Sharawagi, published by Brick Books in 2011. He is the author of 11 previous volumes of poetry, including The Alphamericon, a deck of visual poem cards, and Or, published by Talon Books in 2014. He is a former director of the Wilfrid Laurier University Press and is now co-editor of the Laurier Poetry Series and lives with his wife, Charlene Winger, in Grey Highlands, Ontario. So I'm going to take a few minutes to just reflect on my take on the book and some of the things that occurred to me, and then we'll go into some questions. I'll ask Brian some questions, and he can
put me on the spot.
He'd put you on the spot. To put you on the spot. So right now I'm going to delve into a small slice of Brian's book. One of the many lines that struck me as I read Unidentified Poetic Object was this one from Equilibrium Vector. So when I answered the door, I was surprised to find it was me knocking all the time. Like so many of the lines crafted and words used in the book, this one resonates on multiple frequencies. There's the straight-up reading, which implies that things in the world exist in and of themselves, disinterested, valueless, neutral. It is the artist or thinker or contemplative who examines them in isolation and in combination with other things and gives them relevance or significance. There are, however, further interpretations of this sequence of seemingly simple words. There's the implication of the world knocking at one's door, offering up its cornucopia of sensation and experience, and that when we answer, we make the gesture of responding to that knocking and engaging with what lies beyond the door. There's also an alternative connotation of knocking, that of testing or sounding surfaces to determine what's behind them, as someone would knock on a wall to help find the studs, or more romantically, a secret room or a hidden passage. There's the idea that one is both subject and object, receiver and producer, actor, reactor, and acted upon. And finally, the uses of the words surprised and all the time imply discovery, revelation, delight, and enduring curiosity. So the foregoing is the richness of what I found when I read these lines constructed of simple words and conventional syntax, and I'm sure another reader with a different set of expectations and experiences could find more. But if lines this simple could hold so much, what can we say about the rest of this capacious, complex, playful, fractious, maddening, wide-ranging, elusive, and elusive, cognitively calisthenic book? If this introduction is making you nervous, don't be. There will be much you don't understand in these poems, but as the late American poet Reginald Shepard said, I don't understand some of my favorite poems. I don't know what they mean, but I know what happens to me when I read them. I know the experience I have and its effect on me. There's meaning and pleasure to be extracted even from that which you don't and yet attempt to understand. And there's something to be said for the argument that a poem should not, in fact, simply be a vehicle for transmitting a message, a point, or a moral. In this view, the poem, its words, shape, evocations, connotations, explorations, sounds, rhythms, stimulus to further reflection or research, open-endedness is actually the end in itself. And further, Scattered amid the rich, challenging, elusive density of Brian's poems, there are many moments of sheer beauty and tenderness. So now I'd like to take a few minutes to ask Brian a little bit about how these poems came to be and his process as he was writing them. So Brian, as I read this book and recalling our conversation of a few weeks ago, I found myself thinking about the idea that everything is made up of other whole things, which are made up of other whole things. You refer several times in the book to the nature of objects, and at our last conversation you referred to the concept of extractiveness and utility of objects. Can you talk about objects a little bit more?
Sure. Unidentified ones, and others of that ilk. Objects, things have always fascinated me since as a kid. I used to pick up feathers in my mother's garden and imagine that I was a bird, or that the feather was part of me. Or objects, I don't know, they're strange creatures, and we tend not to see that strangeness. Initially, we look for use, I think, out of objects. And I mean, this stands us in fairly good stead up to a point. But we seem to, especially in the West, we seem to have this notion, this automatic metaphysical background that insists that we turn an object into use right away before anything else. And, you know, we name it, we tame it, we control it, we master it, and pretty soon we're on this slippery slope where, you know, exploration becomes exploitation, becomes extirpation. We somehow have missed the lives of the things, of the objects. What we have to do, I think, what I would really like to be able to do is see into, to build a responsiveness to. And things, there's a new movement, philosophical thinking that's happening now, called vitalism, and it harks back a little bit to Merleau-Ponty and Bergson, but it's an understanding of the thingness of these things, not that necessarily they have a spiritual life in them, but they are filled with energy, and it's whether it's physical or chemical. Or more. Even things that we don't consider to be alive are in fact alive in some other ways that we never considered important. So I think it's incumbent on us to start rethinking about all of this.
Does the idea of relationship come into this?
Absolutely. And it's something that we build in responsiveness. So, I mean, initially the object is obdurate. It's it's a thing that doesn't want to give anything to us, and we have to make it into something.
Okay.
You know, so and you know, this goes all the way back to Plato, right, where his ideal things have to imbue dumb material with life. We have to make meaning out of that. But they have their own meanings, and they have their own interactions. They're part of a network and a system of life. And, you know, there's and we maybe touched on this earlier, but in our previous conversations, but it's a fascinating phrase that I love and stumbled upon reading Cannibal Metaphysics by Viveros de Castro. And he's quoting another anthropologist who, both these guys study Amazonian indigenous cultures. And the relationship that many Indigenous peoples have to things is not what it's for, what we can turn it into, a weapon, a tool, a meaning, extractive value, but it's who are they? The who of things. And that really struck me as being, quite a different way from our typical kind of understanding. And so a lot of the things that I try to do in the book is to open up some of those doors, and that's the kind of thing that's knocking. In fact, that phrase kind of goes back to Rumi and his his spiritual self that's trying to wake him up.
Right.
And so many of these objects can do that for us, I think. And it's a question of being open to them, which is very difficult to do, especially as, we all have to make a living and we all have to do, there's stuff we have to do.
Right.
And I think we just get caught up in this wheel that's now crushing the earth as we know it. I think we have to do something quite different. And it really is a total mindset change. There's another bit of reading that's been very important to me in trying to understand what I'm doing. And it comes from Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. She's a biologist, a trained biologist, and an Indigenous person who's very cognizant of Indigenous wisdom. And it's a fascinating book in the way she is able to put these two totally different worlds together and look at them and not totally devalue one for the other, but see how they speak to each other.
Right.
What we might learn.
What the correspondences are.
So she has this great little story, interpretation really, I guess, of, and this is representative of the difference in our cultures. Our first person, if you like, in the Judeo-Christian world is Adam. And, he was instructed by God to go out and name the creatures. Whereas Nanabojo, who's the Anishinaabe first person, his responsibility was to go out and learn the names of the creatures. And it's a totally different approach. And there's so much for us to learn.
It's almost almost literally directional. The one approach is from me out to there, and the other approach is there is coming to me. Out there is coming to me.
And it's that reciprocity that's so important that I think in the West we've lost. I don't know. The whole thing it just kind of overwhelmed me, and it's not as if I began because you could take a writing approach, that would be, okay, what do I see? What do I respond to in these objects? And you could construct a poem about, this plant and the intelligence of the plant responding to the world, a kind of anthropomorphizing process. There's nothing wrong with that at all. We need probably a lot more of that. That used to be a bad thing to do, right? Intellectually, but I think it's a really important process that we need to reevaluate. But that's one way to go about it, and I don't do that in the book. I end up, putting all kinds of things on the page that collide together and crash together, because I can't actually grasp what they are, and I don't know what they are, and I know some of what they are, and so little things open and flash and then close again, and they kind of in their interaction together, create other objects, which none of us, I haven't heard of before.
Yeah, yeah.
So you end up with strings of words together that you go like, what's that?
Well, that kind of leads me to my next question, because I had written here, at the same time as objects being spotlighted for themselves, one of the things I loved about this collection was that your poems suggest the myriad and seemingly disconnected things with which a moment are filled. The way disparate things are enmeshed: sensation, perception, thought, memory, emotion, areas of intellectual endeavor, anticipation, planning, speculation, prognostication. These are all, of course, states of mind, but it often felt like the poems were kind of jazz-like in this way. You know, one note, one beat, riffing off another. One of the lines in Mirology is, each word holding open a world. Could you speak a little bit to that as well?
I think that's a sense of our responsibility. It's what a word can do, and it's a pause in, headlong action, where you want to just stop for a moment and be open and give that world that you're seeing the opportunity to grow and to be and to maintain, rather than just obliterated in a process.
You have a couple of lines in the poem. Sequence is another unreliable narrator. We put too much trust in before we go out. And the other line was, what I know dims, what I don't shimmers, which I really, really loved, because it's both of those things are, there's almost a little bit of a Buddhist meditative letting go of preconception, letting go of expectations of what the object is, expectations of what the poem is, expectations of what you're supposed to do with it. And then going from there. So can you speak to that a bit?
What is the book? Nothing. There's a series of essays. Marcus Boone orchestrated the volume, trying to come at nothingness, the notion of Buddhist nothingness, from all kinds of different points of view. And one of the things that struck me in there, because it resonated with my feeling, is that we have an object inside us. It's a very stone-like object often, and it's called the self. And we really don't know what that is. And because it is often just there, we have all kinds of assumptions about it, but we don't know. We don't really know what that is. And it is a kind of nothing. And that space, which is not totally empty, but is not graspable, is not something that we can reason our way through, has great appeal for me. And if I remind myself of this, then I can sometimes actually do the stepping back and get into a possible meditative space.
Right.
So once again, we're at the opening. How can we open? How can we be in history? How can we be in the environment that we've changed so much? These are just maybe little ways of doing that. And I hope the poems bring some of that forward.
Okay, so we want to thank you, Brian, for coming in and answering a few questions about your poetry.
Great chatting as always.
Yeah, and now I'm going to ask you to maybe read a couple of pieces from the book.
Okay, it would be a pleasure.
Great.
going to read a couple of pieces about place. What kind of thing, what kind of object is a place? What kind of object is a landscape? We moved up here almost 6 years ago, so we're newcomers. And Grey Highlands, of course, is a new name. Grey County is a new name. And so is Artemisia, Proton, and Osprey, and Euphrasia. And so, for that matter, was the Queen's Bush, a new name. It's actually the land of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Ottawa. And it's the land that our ancestors turned into property. Transformation is written everywhere, and it's being written. Is unfinished sky mud drift, glacial karst meltwater, writing some words in landscape shale creatures, muskrat, snapping turtle, catbird, cattail, is trapline fishing camp axes, fence line, muskrat, barn railways, silo highways, power corridor aggregate extraction, is nicotinoid wind turbine drone surveillance extinctions. Just beyond this drumlin is a small word along the Underground Railway, across reckless bodies of water and Anishinaabe-Moan, whispered up from Riverstone. Field tarmac is another outwash, with trees and a side road at Irish Lake. Beyond that hillock is a coyote den at the rim of the Aspen Glade, where a harrier ghosting finesses etymologies of sun and shadow shafted, glide, beat, beat, glide, fugue words. In this piece, we're going to be doing a drive-by history with the CB radio tuned to an epigenetic channel. The silence of the drive in the poem is Freud's. The death drive was, in fact, initially called the Nirvana Drive, which is fascinating. Terra Nullius shows up in the poem, and it's the legal framework, of course, the colonists used to do what they wanted in the land. Meant no one's land, empty land. Shadow water radio. The radio in the flecked by turbine shadow flicker is squeezed through a DNA torque drive, the shimmering silence of the drive. Ravens fly off in all directions, weaponed with gesture-like, burning off the scalded mercy of a stream. It sometimes seems you need to come a great distance to get to the present. That body that appears as a pike is a verb in another language. Palatial thunder in the south. Under a bullet-riddled fuselage of night sky, whatever happened is still happening. Refractory in a catachresis of progress proton, station, no longer a station. Dispersed settlement of Priceville, not likely founded by a Colonel Price. The hacking treaties, terra nullius. A thing inside a heading of thinking you're inside of falls the way a coin or a knife falls through still water, turning waves of light lazily over, and out. This piece is called In the Field. Burst phantasms, Catherine wheel, seed heads rinsed with tiny chemical washes of feeling. The field is an organ of sensation. Practice beginning again from a different direction. Not that this would render things less perplexing, even if it could be done. I don't want to be beheaded for predicting the future, to be found to be harboring mice, tiny soldiers of Satan. The accountability apparatus is restless. a bardo of failed, reverse-engineered justice looking for victims. They're shooting throughout the counties of blame, through the fine air of dusk, its colors collapsing through the risen dust of hunters, killers, soldiers, cops, of drones, of IEDs. With whom am I struggling? A field returning to forest senses the extent of continuous darkness and awakens with phytochromes. What if each word were a tiny conflagration of letters, of touch, that could change genetic makeup? What if it memorized photosynthesis and timed feeling with sunlight? What if it were a bowl that could hold a life, a river who could flood its gifts from crows, bottle cap, foam dart, marble, Donald Duck, Pez dispenser, orange, glass, shard? What if each word were a not word, a wilderness word, a difference between before and after, action potentials in the kettle, field across which coy wolves stare at me in stillness? The incommensurate. Though incommensurate with itself, language nonetheless somehow shoots a few arrows into the vanishing point of things, which have come here from a great distance, which makes it clear we have come here from a great distance, or are asleep, to the future. Or, for example, the untenable proposition of flight from hollow bones. On second thought, let's assume music streams through feathers from a great distance. Let's assume love is the name of the 10,000-year-old spear point found in 1970 not far from where I live, with my wife, in a house built for someone else in 1997 on glacial outwash that tried on the disguise of a farm in 1854. Let's manage our assumptions from a great distance and understand distance is timing, leaving us beside ourselves, sometimes even with laughter or maybe a wound made of porcupine quills, or with longitude, because the ink with which it's written is time sensitive, and there is no such thing as the opposite of meaning. There are a bunch of raven poems in this book, and I'm going to read one of them now. After a long walk with ravens, a barking cat, tumbler turning a snoring chainsaw, a talking clock, dialing from the 1950s. Listen closely, the ravens say. In many languages, some inaudible in the treetops. For these secrets you will now be carrying. They are knocking on your skin with weightlessness. I was out walking by the wetland. I was in the kitchen, looking out the window at night across English Bay to mountains in Grey Highlands. I was in our bed smelling your skin. I was walking back to the field of the wasp's nest that later was becoming a subdivision. I was walking by the river. You can walk a long time. Many have been shot walking, or standing, or sitting, or sleeping. And if you were to keep on walking anyway, at what point would time fall in love with you? And would it be because it can't read the secrets or knows them already?